So it's 6 o'clock, and so we're going to get started right away. My name is Benjamin Nuss. I'm the Renewable Energy Technician Instructor at Mid-State Technical College. And it's my pleasure to moderate this forum here this evening. To begin with, we'd like to thank some of our sponsors: Clean Green Action, Macmillan Memorial Library, Central Wisconsin Nature Foundation, Citizens Climate Lobby, League of Women Voters, and the Wisconsin Rapids area, Mid-State Renewable Energy Society, Mid-State Students Environmentally United for a Sustainable Society, which has the acronym of SUSE, and the Wisconsin Rapids Mayoral Council on Sustainability. Tonight we're going to have three presenters, and our emphasis is to focus on the problem of climate change and ways to address the problem on both the national and local level. Each presenter will have 30 minutes, and it's my task to keep them in that 30-minute range. We will have some time for questions during the presentation, and then we've got a half-an-hour session of Q&A that will follow after their presentations. So at the conclusion of the program, you're invited to stay also for a community conversation, and we'll stay as long as we need. Before we do the introductions, I wanted to make my own plug. As I mentioned, I'm the Renewable Energy Technician Instructor. I've been teaching at Mid-State for 10 years. And we have an associate degree program in which we train solar installers. So we feel that we're part of the solution to one of these problems as well. On May 10th, Friday, May 10th at 11 o'clock, we're going to have a ribbon cutting because we are going to have a public electric vehicle charging station that is solar powered on the Wisconsin Rapids campus that we've been installing with students. Yes, right? We've been installing with students. We got grant funds. We got donations of the solar panels. So we'll have 6 electric vehicle charging stations, and we really think that we could be community leaders in this way. Our next step is to put electric vehicle charging stations at all of our campuses to help people kind of facilitate purchasing electric vehicles. Our first speaker tonight is Alan Haney, Emeritus Professor of Forestry from the College of Natural Resources, University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Alan came to Stevens Point in 1988 as Dean of the College of Natural Resources, a position he held for 10 years. He returned to full-time teaching and research in 1998 and then retired in 2007. He now devotes his energy to writing, consulting, forest management, and occasional lectures. His areas of expertise include ecosystem restoration, adaptive management, savanna restoration, land conservation, forest community responses to disturbance, aviation ecology, and climate change. His published works includes 12 books and over 4 dozen technical papers. Alan has been a board member or science advisor for 10 conservation and environmental organizations in Wisconsin, including the Conservation Hall of Fame, Sand County Foundation, and the Ice Age Trail Alliance. He was honored in 1997 by the School of Natural Resources, UW-Madison, with the Wisconsin Idea Award, and in 2000 by the Society for Conservation Biology with the White Lady Slipper Award for his contributions to conservation of biological diversity. His most recent works include Backyard Wonders, a collection of essays that explore some of the mysterious nature around us, Jewels of Nature, an examination of the ecology of 92 species of birds common to central Wisconsin, Laughing in the Wilderness, a collection of humorous anecdotes describing personal incidents during wilderness research and explorations, and Follow Old Trails, the natural history of the Canadian Shield, based on a canoe trip with several companions from Lake Superior to Hudson Bay, following the old fur trade routes. Join me in welcoming Alan Haney.
Thank you, Ben. Well, I want to jump right into it, but we are going to be dealing with the question of which future do we choose. I'm guessing that the vast majority of the people here, perhaps even everyone, is of the opinion that we can choose a better future than the one that we are likely to have if we do not take more drastic action. And I'm going to explore that by looking at the IPCC report that was issued this past November, in which the information on climate change was updated. And I need to say a little bit about who the IPCC is, because I think that gives us a little better appreciation for this particular group. This group was established in 1988 by the United Nations Environmental Program and the World Meteorological Organization. It is represented by scientists from about 195 countries. That varies a little bit from year to year, but about 195 countries with several thousand individuals contributing to the information that is compiled into the conclusions of the committee when they issue their reports. And these people represent not only meteorologists and ecologists, but they also represent sociologists, computer modelers, and others who have expertise, particularly related to issues around climate change. I should mention that much of what we will deal with as we see the climate continue to make the kind of changes that we are already experiencing are sociological. Excuse me. So several of the scientists involved in the IPCC are sociologists. So the 1.5 degree Celsius report, as it's been labeled, was prompted by grave concerns that were a result of the IPCC realizing that their report of 2015 was too conservative. They concluded that the growing evidence that continues to be collected around the world, both economic and sociological as well as environmental, suggests that the damage that we're likely to experience with a 2-degree rise, and we're talking Celsius here, a 2-degree Celsius rise, it will be more extreme than what we could well tolerate without undue hardship on vast millions of people throughout the world. So they decided that they needed to update and revise that report. In 2015, you may recall that it was believed that a goal of limiting the average global temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius would result in serious consequences, but were changes that we could basically live with, one way or the other, with modifications in terms of lifestyle and where we live, perhaps. That was the basis for the 2015 Paris Agreement, in fact. And in that Paris Agreement, if participating countries were to be able to meet the goals that were set on emissions, it was thought that it would be consistent with holding the average increase in global climate warming to 2 degrees. Incidentally, as you probably are well aware, President Trump plans to withdraw the U.S. from this agreement. The IPCC now believes that every effort should be made to keep global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees because damage of 2 degrees warming would be devastating, and we'll take a quick look at some of that aspect. If the world continues, this is the bottom line, if the world continues with the present business as usual, doing the kinds of things that we're doing to shift to renewable energy and so forth, the average global temperature will rise at least by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius in this century with catastrophic consequences. The pattern is clear, but our climate-related problems are just beginning, and we're all witnessing that. So just to remind you of a few things, the past 5 years have been the 5 warmest years on record. Total storm damage nearly every year has established new records. It's been up and down a little bit. This past January, a study published by Science, one of the leading journals in the world, reported that the oceans are warming 40% faster than was previously modeled. So as these information continues to come in and the models are upgraded, we realize that things are changing faster and in more negative ways than was previously thought. The models predict that droughts, already some of the worst in recent history, will spread and intensify with global climate change as an example. And we've certainly seen that here in the United States, but it's been experienced in other parts of the world, particularly in Africa, Australia, and elsewhere. A report released in January by the Hindu Kush Himalaya Assessment states that the alpine glacier in the Himalayas are melting half again faster than was previously predicted, and 2/3 could be gone by 2100. And you may say, well, so what? What if the glaciers go? It's estimated that nearly a quarter of the world's population depends upon the meltwater from the glaciers for their drinking waters and other water sources during the summer. So a quarter of the world's population could be without adequate water if this comes about as it now is projected. So if the world continues with business as usual, a 2 degree Celsius rise seems unavoidable. Even with prompt changes in energy policy. But to avoid unprecedented climate-related disasters, we should make the difficult changes to keep the global temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the conclusion of these thousands of scientists who are the experts on climate change, based on all the available data that they could collect and compile and model from throughout the world. Here are some changes or differences that if we compare the projection for a 1.5 degree rise as compared to a 2 degree rise. 10 million fewer people will be at risk from sea level rise if we can keep it at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is incidentally all within this century that is projected. Plant and animal species losing at least 50% of their habitat will be reduced by half. So in other words, we can reduce by half the number of species that are likely to be endangered or to go extinct. More than 800,000 square miles of permafrost will remain frozen. And again, I probably don't need to mention to you why that's important. Here you see two lines. The black line is the line at which the permafrost is likely to retreat to. The dotted line is where the permafrost is likely to retreat to as it melts from the area that where it currently is. It's shown in the black line in the global look here. And that's particularly important because as the permafrost melts, it exposes the organic matter that is collected in these tundra soils that releases, in addition to carbon dioxide, a large amount of methane. Methane is a gas that is 30 times more energy absorbing than carbon dioxide. So this is one of those tipping points, or potential tipping points, that could result in a very rapid change in global climate. 10 to 30% of coral reefs could be saved if we can keep it at 1.5 degree rise instead of the 2 degree rise. And the number of people who will experience critical water shortages will be cut in half. And so we're talking about a difference of millions of people who will be confronted with critical water shortages unless something changes. A recent study concluded that as many as 150 million more people will die because of additional air pollution associated with a 2 degree rise in, on average, global temperature compared to only 1.5 degrees. So mortality will go up substantially, both from heat-related causes as well as associated things such as air pollution. So the panel concluded the following things. Human-induced warming since pre-industrial time, we know, reached 1 degree Celsius in 2017. That's a fact. It is now increasing at about 0.2 of a degree Celsius per decade at an increasing rate. So it's warming faster and faster as time goes along. The rate of warming, of course, is different over different areas of the globe. Some are warming much faster than others. The rate of overall warming, of course, is increasing. Land surfaces are warming faster than the ocean. And this is a rather startling conclusion of the panel. If net emissions were reduced to zero right now, if just today we cut off all emissions of carbon into the atmosphere, the Earth will continue to warm, reaching about 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. So we are locked into that. We can't go back unless we could figure out some way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. It's something we haven't yet really accomplished in any significant way. Second conclusion, impacts of global warming leading to and beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, as well as effects of most of the mitigation efforts, fall disproportionately on the poor. Adaptation to the climate change, that is actions taken to decrease the impact, is far more difficult for the poor and the vulnerable, who simply don't have the wherewithal to live in an area that is protected more from ocean rise or from storm damage or flooding and so forth and so on. Sustainable development demands reduction in inequality and elimination of poverty, but there is great uncertainty about which pathways of adaptation and mitigation are most equitable. So this is a conclusion of this group of scientists looking at climate change, is that the inequity that we see among the haves and the have-nots in the world is a problem that has to be solved if we're to solve the climate change problem as well. Policies reflecting a high price on emissions, think carbon tax or carbon fee and dividend, are necessary to achieve cost-effective 1.5 degree Celsius compatible solutions. In other words, this group of scientists, again, including the economists, say that this has to happen. Investments in low carbon energy technologies and energy efficiencies need to approximately double over the next 20 years, with concomitant decrease in fossil fuel extraction and processing. 85% of carbon emissions are not now taxed. World Bank estimates that a price of $40 to $80 per ton is required by 2020, next year, to help achieve a 1.5 degree future with a 2 to 5% annual increase in the carbon fee. So let's take a quick look at the carbon fee and dividend concept. Perhaps you've heard that beginning this spring, Canada is assessing a carbon fee of $20 per metric ton. Not nearly enough, obviously. Increasing, however, by $10 per ton per year to reach a $50 per ton in 2022. So that's pretty much the target that everybody says that has to happen. U.S. officials, incidentally, say that it would be political suicide to introduce similar legislation in the United States. Using a very conservative 3% compounding rate, that is what an expenditure today would be worth at some time in the future, economists have estimated that the social cost is currently about $42 for each metric ton of carbon added to the atmosphere. That's the storm damage and all the other associated damage that's coming from climate change as a result. One of these social costs in storm damage is one of the big ones, and we've certainly been seeing that recently, not only here but around the world. And there's all kinds of data on that, but this graph to the left shows that. Also notice the graph to the lower right. The top two curves are the storms and flooding damages as contrasted to, say, earthquakes or things that are not directly related to climate change. So you can see that the increase in the damage associated with climate change is pretty real. Getting back to the point about the fee and dividend, if you drive 10,000 miles a year and get 25 miles per gallon, you will use 400 gallons of gasoline with a resulting increase of a bit over 3.5 metric tons of carbon that you would put into the atmosphere. Using the Canadian model, you would expect to pay an additional $70 for fuel, a 7% increase in your gas if it's at $2.50 a gallon. William Nordhaus, and he's the Yale economist who won the Nobel Prize for his work on climate change economics, concluded that a 10% GDP loss because of climate change is very conservative, likely to be far greater unless we implement aggressive reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within the next 10 to 20 years, consistent with what the IPCC committee is saying. The per capita GDP averaged over the entire world is $17,300. A 10% rise in the cost associated with climate change, of course, adds up to, according to these figures, just under $2,000 per person per capita. So a $70 increase in the amount that we pay for gas is a pretty minor comparison compared to the cost of what climate change is going to be if we do nothing or continue as business as usual. The longer the delay in achieving carbon dioxide emissions, the greater the overshoot of the 1.5 degree carbon and the greater the cost of the environmental and social fallout, not to mention the extraordinary cost of retroactively removing carbon from the atmosphere. In other words, if we do nothing and we allow this carbon in the atmosphere to get up to, say, an increase of, equivalent increase of, say, 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, the consequences would be so devastating that we would have to roll out all the technology you can imagine, including some fairly scary technology that's not been proven, to try and reduce the global warming so that we can continue to live peacefully on the earth without the social consequences that we'd otherwise have to pay. Longer delay also means that greater and greater carbon price will be necessary to bring carbon dioxide emissions into line with a sustainable future. So the $50 a ton is actually pretty minor compared to what it will have to be if we delay. The World Bank estimates that by 2050, if we continue on the present course, there will be at least 140 million people displaced by rising ocean levels, for example, spreading drought, disruption of agriculture, and so forth. So if we think that immigration is a problem for us to deal with right now, we haven't even begun to see the problem that's coming if we don't deal with the climate change. If we fail to adequately address global warming now, reliance on carbon removal from the atmosphere to return to 1.5 degree status becomes increasingly necessary after mid-century. The carbon removal from the atmosphere as a solution to climate change is unproven, uncertain, and would likely have far greater cost and far greater risk than reducing the carbon dioxide emission now. There's much more, but the bottom line is clear. If we fail to aggressively reduce greenhouse gases to near zero net emissions by 2050, the Earth will be altered beyond our ability to continue our present lifestyles. It's not going to affect most of us in the room here, but it's going to affect our children and particularly our grandchildren. And it will be far worse for the poor, leading to social upheaval and infrastructure problems we cannot yet even begin to comprehend. In 2018, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, with input from the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy, issued a draft environmental impact statement for the petroleum-powered vehicles for model years in 2021 to 2026. We're hoping to move away from these petroleum-powered vehicles, obviously, but if we were to keep on the track that we're on, we have to see what the environmental impact of that might be in regard to climate change. The EIS was based primarily on climate change projections under the different CO2 emission scenarios which the IPCC has produced. Here are some of the projections if we continue on the present course. Average global temperature increase by 2040 will be at least 1.2 degrees Celsius, 1.8 degrees by 2060, and 2.8 degrees by 2100. Average atmospheric CO2 by 2100 will be 687 parts per million. We're currently at 410. The relationship between the carbon in the atmosphere and the temperature, average global temperature, is absolutely tight. There's not a mathematician in the world that could not fail to see the correlation. So as CO2 goes up, and we're projecting it to go up rather drastically, according to these projections, global temperature is going to increase. The frequency and magnitude of extreme precipitation events will increase everywhere in the United States, but impacts will be especially severe along the coast, where there will be stronger and more frequent storm surges. The ocean level is rising, storms are increasing, and the intensity of the storms are increasing, resulting in more storm surges. Prolonged droughts will increase in length and severity in most regions, but will be worse in the south and the west. Droughts always result in more frequent and more intense wildfires, as we certainly have witnessed in California and elsewhere in the past year or two. Many of the climate-related changes, such as average global temperature, ocean acidification, and more extreme storm patterns, will be essentially irreversible on a multi-century to millennial time scale. In other words, if we continue on the present course and we get to 2100, we are done without any hope of reversing these impacts within 1,000 or so years, perhaps longer. And here, this graph shows a couple things. First, it shows the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is directly related to the increase in carbon dioxide in the ocean, which is the blue dots, and the increasing acidity of the ocean, which is the green dots. With, you can see the acidity continuing to go down. So more and more acidity in the ocean, more and more acid. And that's just one of many effects that we're going to be seeing in the ocean. By the end of this century, the oceans will be twice as acidic as in pre-industrial times. This will happen even if we cut our carbon emissions in half in the next decade. And that would be very optimistic to think we might be able to do that. The result will be hundreds, perhaps thousands of tiny marine organisms, those that produce carbonate shells, going extinct and crashing populations of surviving species. And a study published in 2010 in Nature, again a leading journal, reports that phytoplankton have been declining about 1% per year and have decreased in the northern hemisphere by about 40% since 1950. That is devastating when you consider the importance of the oceans for the food for the people of the world, and the importance of the ocean in terms of moderating climates and other effects that it has in terms of the global population of people and how we live. So the end result is that when we look at the Earth, which we have now for many decades from space and so forth, we realize that we're in an ecosystem. We're in a very big, complex ecosystem. There's tremendous momentum in terms of the changes, such that once things begin to change, and particularly if they go very bad, it is very, very difficult to stop and reverse those changes. And that's essentially what this report is saying, is that if we don't act now, and act quickly, and act in very, very dramatic ways, we will be able to not look back and think that we have a bright future ahead, but we can only look at the devastation in front of us and for those that will follow us. So it is something that should be very sobering for all of us. And my motivation, as well as my hope, is this: simply looking at the children, in this case my grandchildren, and knowing that they are going to pay the price of our hubris and our ignorance and our unwillingness to work. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I'd like to know why we're not talking about Nuremberg trials for the fossil fuel industry and all their deniers that they pay for.
I think I'll let Dan answer that question.
No.
I don't know. I think you're right. I think that what we are doing is just short of criminal, and in fact, I think one could build a pretty good case for saying that it is criminal. And particularly when we're lining the pockets of the wealthy and the big corporations at the expense of the poor and those who have less opportunities to live healthy lives now, and thinking about the consequences of the lives that they have in front of them. So that may happen. It may happen. At some point, it wouldn't surprise me that we may see some charges leveled at some of the culprits that have been contributing to the problem. Other questions? Yes.
Do you think that the people who are the so-called deniers right now are really deniers, or are they people that feel that there is money to be made on adaptations? Let's just wait it out. Let's keep making money and then try to make our next billion on the adaptations.
Yeah.
They can't possibly truly believe that this is a hoax anymore. So what is their motivation?
Yeah, I will repeat the question. The question is the people who are continuing to deny climate change, and I think that number is continuing to go down, I really do, but there still are people that choose to deny that the climate is changing or that we're responsible for it. Are they of this opinion from just their sincerity and the information or lack of information that they have, or do they have other motives? Are they hoping to get rich quick, or to possibly take advantage of windfall opportunities that may come if the climate continues to unravel, as it will? And I don't know the answer to the question. It's a very good question. I suspect a little of both in many cases. There's no question in my mind that big oil and those who are heavily invested in the petroleum industries do have a profit motive to try and delay any serious change from petroleum-based energy to renewables. And I think we've seen that. We certainly saw it with the tobacco wars back before, and I think we see a lot of parallels in that. So the evidence is so solid that your other point, I think, is a very good one, and that is the evidence is so solid that any intelligent person who even pays just a scant attention to the facts and to the information and the conclusions, such as in this 1.5 report, can come to no other conclusion other than the fact that we are damaging the environment. It is changing rapidly in very negative and devastating ways. And perhaps the average person doesn't have the modeling capability to see what the projection is. That's where the IPCC and the scientists come in, is to be able to make these models and to project them in terms of what it's going to result in the future. And that information is so readily available that everybody has access to it, in the developed world, certainly. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Are you optimistic that this could be turned around? Where we do?
That's a tough question. Optimistic? No, I'm not optimistic. Hopeful? Yes, I'm hopeful in several ways. I'm hopeful because, one, I know that if we totally screw this up and we make the world totally unlivable for people, the world will go on, nature will survive, nature will continue, and maybe a better species will evolve that can be more responsible in the future to fill our niche. So I'm hopeful about that. In fact, I'm quite confident about that. I'm also hopeful because I see things happening. We were just talking before among us up here, but there is a sense, it's subtle, but there's a sense of the tide turning, that people around the world, you know, one of the most hopeful things I think we've seen recently is the young people getting involved, the school-aged children getting involved and saying, we demand a better future than what you're giving us. That's very hopeful.
Yes.
We'll have time for a few more questions afterwards, but let me go to our next slide deck. All right, our next speaker is Dan Diedrich, Wisconsin co-coordinator and leader of the Stevens Point chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby. Dan is a full-time volunteer for Citizens Climate Lobby, also known as CCL, for whom he coordinates the work of the 20 Wisconsin CCL chapters, as well as leading one of the 4 chapters here in Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District. His chapter has grown to include over 650 members in Stevens Point, Wisconsin Rapids, and other communities in Portage County and in Southwood County. Before joining CCL in 2012, Dan helped to found and lead the Green Team at Frame Memorial Presbyterian Church in Stevens Point, the Interfaith Community for the Earth, as well as the Central Wisconsin chapter of Wild Ones, Native Plants, Natural Landscapes, an organization that promotes biodiversity. Join me in welcoming Dan.
Thank you. Ignore what's on the screen. We've just heard the bad news, or more accurately, the terrible news, the horrific news about climate change. So now let's take a moment to imagine something wonderful. What if we had a bill in Congress that charged fossil fuel companies for their pollution? And it worked so well that American greenhouse gas emissions dropped by nearly half in just over a decade. What if that same bill prevented millions of premature deaths because our air was so much cleaner? What if that bill also helped protect our troops by keeping them out of harm's way? What if it created millions of jobs in the clean energy economy? What if it had a border policy that encouraged other countries to follow suit and protected American jobs and American organizations? What if the bill was much stronger than our Paris commitments, way more effective than the Clean Power Plan, hitting its targets for 2030 in just 4 years instead of 10 years, and much stronger than any EPA regulations either existing or pending? What if the vast majority of top economists the world over said that this works? That pricing carbon is the biggest and most effective way we could, or first step that we could take to solve the climate crisis. And again, these economists have said that. Well, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. This bill is real, and it's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It's H.R. 763. But hold on a minute. Is this socially just? Is it the moral thing to do? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, it is, because it distributes all that money from the fossil fuel industries to all Americans equally, so that those who can least afford the increases in the cost of goods and services that will result from it will end up with more money in their pockets than before this bill went into effect. In fact, those with the lowest incomes would end up ahead. most Americans would at least break even, and only those who have the largest carbon footprint would end up behind. And again, they could lower their carbon footprints pretty easily. No bill that has ever been proposed in Congress has come close to this, and it's a bipartisan bill. It's currently in committee in the House of Representatives, and the list of co-sponsors is at 34 co-sponsors and continuing to grow. I'm here today to tell you more about it and to encourage you to urge your members of Congress to support it. But before I do, let's see. Now, didn't get into presenter view, but that's, no, I can live without it.
Not that one.
Yeah.
This one. All right.
It's all right. Let's ignore. Who cares? Here's the arrows. Nope. Not the arrows. Not the arrows. We're locked. Isn't technology wonderful? It will solve all our problems, technology. There we go. Dr. Haney was kind enough to give us the global picture on the impact of climate change. Wanted to narrow in a little bit to Wisconsin, in case you aren't aware of some of these things. This is a FEMA document. You can just type in FEMA and say Wisconsin disaster declarations, and it will give you information about them. This was one from August 17th through September 14th, 2018. Over $218 million in damage. 14 counties declared disaster areas. Historic rainfalls in western Dane County far exceeding the 100-year accounts in some places. May have set a new record for of nearly a foot of rain for the state of Wisconsin in 24 hours. Rainfall in parts of La Crosse, Monroe, Vernon, Zauke, and Washington counties exceeded 100-year amounts. This was August 17th through September 14th. Lost over 1,000 dairy and beef animals and 400 agricultural structures in winter storms. We are also among the 9 states totaling over 1 million acres of farmland underwater in March storms. And NOAA warned of what could be an unprecedented flood season as it forecast more heavy spring rains. I don't know about you, but my yard has come to resemble a lake. I had to get a submersible pump and put it in front of my garage with a 24-foot hose on it to keep my garage from going underwater. And it's still my yard is in real trouble. There are problems worldwide with climate change, but here in Wisconsin, between now and in the middle of the century, average temperatures are supposed to be 6 degrees hotter. Peak temps, 110 to 112. 2 inches more average annual rain, more frequent intense rains and floods, more illnesses, more deaths, more and more severe wildfires. And this last one, mass migrations, is not part of the study that I got all the rest from, but it's the one that scares me the most. I'm not convinced that Wisconsin will be the state that's the worst off in the United States of America as a result of climate change. And I believe that if that's the case, that there will be people from other states who will be coming to Wisconsin to live. And there are mass migrations going on in other parts of the world, and I believe they will happen here as well. Congress has got a number of options for what it can do about climate change. One is nothing. Status quo. Just let things go as usual. And that, of course, is the worst option. That's the one that will have the greatest damage to our well-being, to our environment, to our economy, to our health. That will result from the status quo, as I think Dr. Haney has pretty clearly shown you. Another option is regulation. I am not an opponent of regulation. I think regulation can be a very good thing. But regulation requires regulators. It requires, if we're going to put a limit on how much carbon can go up your smokestack, there has to be somebody measuring how much carbon is going up your smokestack. And that takes money, and it's going to be very expensive to regulate in this particular situation. The Clean Power Plan was basically regulation. When it was issued by President Obama, he said, we're going to do this. I wrote a letter to the editor saying, wonderful idea, biggest thing ever to happen regarding action on climate change. But it's not enough, not nearly enough. And that was regulation. A lot of people don't like regulation. Cap and trade. How many of you understand cap and trade? Would you raise your hands? There are maybe 4 or 5 hands, maybe 6 hands raised in here. Most people don't understand what the heck it is. What fascinates me about cap and trade is that Pope Francis, when he issued his encyclical, didn't come out and say, this is what we ought to do, but he did say there's one thing we shouldn't do, cap and trade. Why? Because it involves capping the amount of carbon dioxide companies can emit, and then those companies can sell some of the carbon dioxide they're going to emit to other companies that could then emit it. And it's too easy to game the system. It's very complex, it's very tricky, it's a great way for rich people to get richer, and for the rest of us to not understand what the heck is going on. Subsidies, we could subsidize certain forms of power. And again, I think that's wise in many regards. But subsidies haven't worked out real well so far. The billions of dollars we're using to subsidize the fossil fuel industry right now in the United States of America isn't working out real well. Picking winners and losers. Another thing we can do is a carbon tax. And that too, to me, is not the world's greatest approach. What it means is you tax fossil fuel companies, you take the money and you give it to the federal government. That's a carbon tax. What's wrong with that? Well, what's the federal government going to do with that money? And what are low-income people going to do now that their cost for fossil fuels is going to be higher? How are they going to pay that higher rate? With what? Part of the Clean Power Plan was that particular problem. What I like is something called fee and dividend, carbon fee and dividend, in which we'll get into in some depth here in a few minutes, but it doesn't have the problems that the other ones do, including the moral problem that's involved with hurting low-income people and disadvantaged people. What makes a good climate change solution at the federal level? First of all, it has to drive large-scale change. Can't be small change. By the way, I'm sure like many of you in this room, or all of you in this room for all I know, you're doing something about climate change right now. It might just be recycling. It might be the car that you drive. It might be putting insulation in your house. There are a lot of things we can do. I'm going to be planting some trees. That too helps fix some carbon. We all do something on an individual level, and I'm not knocking that. The next speaker will be talking about that in more detail. I think it's necessary, but I don't think it's sufficient. And I don't think there's anybody, any climate scientists that think that changing our light bulbs is going to solve the problem. It isn't. It's part of it, but it's not all of it. So it's got to be large-scale change, and as Dr. Haney suggested, it's got to be quick. It can't be something, we'll put this off and someday maybe we'll get to it. It's got to be quick. We have to use incentives that support choice. We can mandate change. We can say you can't drive that kind of car anymore, you have to drive this kind. But it's wiser, I think, to give people options so that they can make the choice themselves and choose wisely and help support our environment by supporting change. It's got to be fair. Talked about that already, especially for low-income, disempowered people. It's got to be sticky. What that means is that it's got to be here no matter who's in the administration, no matter who's in Congress. It's got to be something that conservatives and liberals alike can agree on, or Republicans and Democrats. If not, once there's a change in government, there will be a change in this law, it will disappear, and everything will be lost. So it's got to stick around. It's got to be healthy for the planet. It's got to be healthy for our economy. So what meets these criteria? Carbon fee and dividend policy. What's involved? A fee is charged on fossil fuels at the source. Depending on how much carbon those fossil fuels will emit when they're burned, the oil company, the gas company, the coal company would have to pay a certain amount of money. It may be that they're not pulling it out of the coal mine. Maybe they're importing it from someplace else. Well, when it crosses the border, they have to pay a fee. Where does that money go? Federal government. What happens next? 100% of net revenue goes to American households as a dividend. More about which in a minute. Keyword net. What does net mean? Well, it costs something to get the money into the federal government, takes something for the money to go out from the federal government to the citizens. But other than that, the rest is what goes out. There's none staying in the federal government to be used for any other purposes, whatever they might be, and no matter how wonderful they might be. So that's what a carbon fee and dividend policy is. What am I here to tout this evening? The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, H.R. 763. These are some of the people in the House of Representatives who support it. It's a bipartisan climate solution. This is 32 faces. I haven't got the last 2 faces on there. There are 34 people, I understand, at the moment in the House who are supporting it, and the number is continuing to go up. What does it do? Well, places a fee on coal, oil, and gas, starts relatively low, but grows at a pretty healthy rate over the years. There are other taxes that start higher and grow more slowly. We think this is the best of both worlds. It's a healthy rate to begin with, but it goes up every year a substantial amount. Carbon fee. What's the dividend? Net revenue collected, allocated in equal shares, repeat, equal shares, to every month, to every American. So every month you get a check in the mail, or else you get a certain amount of money deposited in your bank account every month by the federal government. Is the federal government up to this? Well, I'm on Social Security and I'm managing to survive. I get my check. Maybe 1 or 2 others of you in here getting that check. The federal government's up to this. I think they can handle it. Then there's a border carbon adjustment. What does that mean? Goods coming into the country from countries that don't have a carbon fee and dividend will be charged that carbon fee at the border. So if we're getting something from another country, I always talk about widgets. I don't know why I like widgets, I guess. Anyway, somebody in France is making widgets. It costs them $10 to make widgets. In the US, it costs $11 to make widgets. Why? Carbon fee. So widgets are more expensive in the US. They're $11. So the French send their $10 widget to the US. It goes through the border, and when it passes the border, it suddenly costs $11. Why? Because the French have to pay $1 on each widget to the federal government. The U.S. federal, does this make sense? See what I'm saying? Passes the government, they pay $1. U.S., we've got a $11 widget, and we're sending it to France, trying to sell it there. It goes through the border, suddenly that $11 widget costs $10, because $1 is returned to the manufacturer, to the American manufacturer. So in France, we're at parity, in the U.S., we're at parity. Does this make sense? The idea is we don't want to hurt American businesses, and we don't want to reward foreign businesses, and that's what the carbon border adjustment does. All right, next thing, limited regulatory adjustment. This too is built into the bill. No new regulations by the EPA on covered emissions, but if emission targets are not being met after 10 years, then they would be set on there. This doesn't impact regulations on any other pollutants, doesn't affect auto mileage standards, water quality, or anything else. What it says is this is the way we're going to deal with these kinds of emissions in the United States. And we're not going to have other things in addition to this, so that there will be a stable market for people to work from. All right. What are the benefits of this kind of an approach? Well, they are that it's effective, it will work, it will create jobs, it's good for people, it's bipartisan, and it's revenue neutral. More about which later. First of all, it's effective. It's going to reduce America's emissions by at least 40% within 12 years. It's supported by economists and scientists as simple, comprehensive, and effective. How many economists support it? There are 3,500 American economists, conservative and liberal alike, signed a paper supporting carbon dividend approach statement within the past couple months. That's more economists that have signed any statement on anything in the history of the United States, 3,500 of them, including Nobel Prize winners and economic advisors to presidents, everybody on all sides. Okay, so it's effective. Next thing is it creates jobs. It says here hundreds of thousands of additional jobs over the next 10 years as it helps families across America, thereby stimulating the economy. There was a study done by Regional Economic Models Incorporated, which found that over a 20-year period, over 2 million jobs will be created as a result of this bill. 2 million jobs. Well, how about all those coal miners who are out of work? Well, the fact of the matter is there aren't a lot of coal miners. It doesn't take a lot of people to mine coal. At the present time in the United States, there are more jobs in renewable energy than there are in oil, coal, and gas combined right now in the United States. And over time there will be a lot more in that field as well as in every field. We'll come back to this, talk more about the jobs thing. Next, it's good for people. It will improve health and save lives by reducing pollution that Americans breathe. We in Wisconsin are a part of a region that was studied by that Regional Economic Model study called, I think, the East North Central region. And our region at the moment has greater health problems and more deaths than any other region in the United States. There are 8 regions, but ours has got more deaths. Why? How do we get our energy? How do we get our electric energy? Why we get that? By burning coal. What is the most polluting fossil fuel? Coal. People die as a result of burning coal. And therefore, we in Wisconsin and in our region are going to benefit more than people in any other region from this being implemented. The dividend puts money into people's pockets every month. You can spend it any way you want to. You can spend it on lollipops if you feel like it. But it will particularly help low and middle income Americans. Why? If we all get the same amount of money back, and we do, by the way, everybody gets exactly the same amount of money back, then why does it benefit the low and middle income people? Well, especially low income people aren't spending a lot of money on fossil fuel or products made with it. They may not be driving a car. They may be taking a bike to work or walking. They may not have a car. If they have a car, they certainly don't have 3 or 4 or 27 of them, let alone a jet airplane and a yacht. So they will come out ahead with the same amount of money that Bill Gates is going to come out behind with. Does that make sense? He's not going to make up for all of his carbon that he will be using, but they will. And by the way, middle income people, the average American will at least come out even. It's bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats are both on board co-sponsoring it together. The majority of Americans support Congress taking action on climate change. And that means the majority includes the majority of Republicans and the majority of Democrats have said they want to see some action happening. Again, we were talking before the panel today about the fact that there is a sea change going on in the United States. Most people, I think, today are aware that this is going on, that it's happening, that we are causing it, and that we have got to be part of the solution, or we are going to suffer as well as our kids. Solving climate change is too urgent to get caught up in partisan politics. Members of both parties are already, members in Congress are already supporting this. And they have over the years. We just need to let them know that we want them to support this. We want them to take specific action in support of this bill, and they will do it. Congress does not determine political will. The American people do that. This is a democracy. We tell them what we want, and Congress is supposed to respect that. We want to have a livable environment. We want to have a planet that's survivable for our kids, for other species on this planet, for our oceans. We want that to happen. We have to let Congress know, and this is one, it's not the only thing we're going to have to do, by the way. I'm not trying to hard sell this. This is the first step. It's the best first step, but it's the first step in what we're going to have to do to keep this planet livable. All right. Also, it's revenue neutral. And what that means is that the money that comes in from this bill goes out to the American people. All done. It does not stay in Congress to be used to pave new roads, to build new airplanes. It doesn't, it goes for one thing, and that is to the American people. So that's integral to this particular bill. How much? Well, $288 a month after 10 years. That's how much money would come in. $396 a month after 20 years. That's for a household of 4 people, I believe. So about $4,000 a year. Not bad, $4,000 or $5,000 for a family of 4. This is according to the Regional Economic Models study. Government doesn't keep any of it, so the size of the government doesn't grow. Build political will to act on climate. That is the mission of the Citizens Climate Lobby. That's what we are trying to accomplish. Build political will to act on climate. We can do that locally. There are things we do as an individual, as a family, as a community. There are many cities. The city of Stevens Point passed a resolution supporting carbon fee and dividend. There are many other cities that have done so. There are county governments that have done so. You could encourage your county government to get involved and do that sort of thing. But also advocate for an effective national policy as well. Oh, how do we do that? How do we in Citizens Climate Lobby accomplish it? Well, we did well over 3,000 outreach events last year. This is an outreach event. In case you didn't notice, you're in an outreach event. You are. We have film screenings on topics relating to climate change. We have get-togethers of various kinds. We hand things out. We have a booth outside. Check it out on your way out. It's a really nice looking booth. And Kathy, where are you? Kathy is right there. She's the one who put the booth together. Talk to Kathy about the neat booth. We get local leaders to endorse the bill. And last year we had 3,675 endorsements of the bill from local leaders. If you know of organizations that might want to have presentations on this topic, let us know. We'd be delighted to provide one. The price is right. We're free. So, open doors for CCL to speak to your groups. Write letters to the editor. Write guest editorials. Write email messages to your members of Congress. All of these are things you could do. Come with us to Washington, D.C. Last year, about 1,400 or so of us went to Washington in June. This year, we're going again in June, 9th through the 11th. Probably have more than 1,400. It's kind of a kick, by the way, to be there in Washington with 1,500 of your closest friends who have the same view you do about climate change and have the opportunity to meet with your members of Congress and talk with them about this important topic. Parting thought. One of the questions that came up before was, are you an optimist on this subject or are you a pessimist? I love this quote. I mentioned it to Dr. Haney earlier, but this is from Wendell Berry, my favorite poet and outstanding writer. He once said, we don't have a right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. We don't have that right. Only question we have the right to ask is, what's the right thing to do? What does this earth require of us if we want to continue to live on it? It will still be here no matter what we do. But we may not be on it. And future generations of human beings may not be on it. And future generations of other animals may not be on it unless we take action. So that's one of the things that motivates me. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious whether the carbon fee and dividend model has been modeled by any other countries or governments?
Excellent question. It's been modeled by a number of them. The one that always sticks in my mind is British Columbia. As you may know, Canada is implementing carbon fee and dividend as we speak. This spring it started Canada nationwide, but before that, British Columbia had implemented a carbon tax. I don't know if it was carbon fee and dividend. They returned the money in a different way. They're giving it back to the citizens, but the citizens got it nonetheless. Long story. Anyway, when that happened, people said, well, you can do that, but it's going to destroy your economy. People are going to hate it. But go ahead, see what happens. And they implemented it, and people in British Columbia love it. They thought it was wonderful. Didn't destroy their economy, improved their economy over the rest of Canada. The British Columbian economy advanced at a faster rate. There are a lot of Scandinavian countries that have something like this going on as well. Other countries around the world, but that's the one that stands out. Yes, Jim.
Dan, what did it do to the carbon emissions
rate in British Columbia?
It reduced the carbon emissions. If you want to know the percentage, I can't tell you that offhand. All you have to do to find that out is punch in British Columbia carbon tax, and it will tell you how much and what the people thought of it. Yes?
Sort of in line with that is, okay, how is it actually gonna cut emissions, carbon?
Yeah.
And what's to stop the corporation that's getting taxed, or this, have to pay this fee, to push that fee onto the customer that's buying the product that the fee was made on?
Excellent question. Let me take the second one first and then remind me of the first one, I'll come back to it. They are going to push it off onto us. If Exxon has to pay for the amount of carbon that its fuel emits when it's burned, they aren't going to eat that. Whatever the company might be, they're going to pass it on to the consumer. How much are they going to pass on? Well, they can't pick a number, because if they do, then Shell is going to beat the heck out of Exxon. Am I making sense? It's a capitalist society. If somebody else is selling fuel for less than Exxon is, people will buy it from the other company and not from Exxon. But yes, they will pass the cost on to us. Keep in mind, however, you're getting money back from the federal government that should be enough for most Americans to pay that higher fee. Not just for money at the gas pumps, but for a higher fee on coffee. Because coffee is roasted using fossil fuels, one way or another. And so when you buy something from Starbucks, you're paying for some fossil fuels in the process. So yeah, they will pass it on to us, but it will even out. The first question was?
Again, how does that reduce carbon?
Great.
Bottom line, that has to happen.
Right. That reduces carbon in a number of ways. What do you know? That says my time's up. It reduces carbon because, for one thing, if you have a choice, you can buy something that costs $10 and is made with fossil fuels, or buy something that costs $9 and is made with solar power. Which one are you going to pick? The $9 one or the $10 one? We're going to pick the $9 one. So a lot of companies are going to start making things using renewable energy. And that's how it's going to reduce the amount of carbon we emit, because people won't be buying stuff made with carbon-based fuels. And also at the same time, it will be stimulating entrepreneurs to support renewable energy. There's no future, I mean, coal's dead already, but for oil and gas, no future there. Solar, wind, there's a future there. Thank you.
Nancy, you'll just have to use the arrows.
Okay.
You'll be able to.
I can work with that.
Our next speaker is Nancy Turk. She is the UW Extension Community Development Educator in Wood County. She's working with other county staff on helping the county and communities to become more energy efficient for cost savings and a solar-ready designation for residents and businesses. As a volunteer, she helps communities around the state with conversations and discussions about how to be more climate ready. Since its inception in 2013, Nancy has participated in a national working group on freshwater and climate change. She was also on the Wisconsin Climate Changes Initiative Advisory Committee. Nancy is an emerita water resource scientist from UW-Stevens Point. Join me in welcoming Nancy.
Thanks, Ben, and good evening. So we're going to shift gears a lot. I'm going to leave all the doom and gloom up to Alan, so we'll put that behind us, and we're going to talk about locally what you can do, what your communities do, and kind of get into some dialogue, hopefully, about ideas that you may have. So recently I started tacking this part of my presentation onto the more serious parts of climate change conversations, typically related to impacts on our natural resources in Wisconsin, because I find that people walk away really disheartened, as though there's nothing they can do. So what we need to do is empower you tonight and give you a smattering of ideas. There are just a wide array of direction you could take with this. And my suggestion is to pick out things that you think you can do and kind of have fun with it, actually. So I want to talk a little bit about what some of the options are, as well as different strategies for communication with your loved ones and coworkers and others that you might want to chat with. And that doesn't necessarily involve lecturing them on climate change. So when we're thinking about what we can do about climate change, there are different terms that are used and different pathways we can take. So you hear the term mitigation, and what mitigation means is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So reducing carbon, reducing burning of fossil fuels and that sort of thing. That's mitigating the effect. Other things that we need to think about are related to adaptation. So we've already seen and experienced change in a variety of things. The most notable, of course, are the magnitudes of the flood events that we're seeing. Adapting would mean that you think about when you're building infrastructure or something, you're going to think about, do we put the same size culvert in that was blown out from this big event that came through, flood event, or are we going to enlarge the size of that culvert so that we don't have to replace it again? And there's a variety of adaptation approaches that can take place. So I'll give you a smattering of ideas on those too. And then you may hear the term resilience, and that's just trying to strengthen the world around us, I guess, so that when we do have flood events, we bounce back a little bit quicker. An example about that, especially related to flood events, would be making sure that we're protecting our wetlands and landscapes that are natural outside in a watershed, so that when a big rain event comes, some of that is absorbed onto the earth and into the groundwater and doesn't directly funnel itself to streams, making the downstream floods even greater. Oops. This way. Okay, so from my opinion and from many people's opinions, pretty much everybody is involved. This is game on for everyone. So there's no waiting for somebody else to take care of this for you. But if you're a business person, you might want to think about things you can do from a business perspective. That's kind of fun. You're moving your mouse.
No, I'm moving it around. We can't actually see it up there, so we're gonna.
Oh,
You keep talking.
okay.
You keep talking. I'll figure this out.
All right. Now I can't see mine. There we go. So there's everywhere from individuals to businesses. Our local communities have been talking about this and need to continue to talk about both mitigation and adaptation and resilience, right? Because you want where you're living to be as strong as possible and resilient as possible. No, you can't take everything. And then we get all the way up to, of course, states can take action, and we know that the new governor is setting some goals related to climate or has set goals related to climate. Many other states have come on board. Nations, of course, and then the global community as a whole. So you fit in there in probably multiple places. Let's see how this works. All right. So if you're looking for a good laundry list that has been quantified by data, actually. So they have gathered together information on all kinds of different practices that can be put in place to mitigate climate change, to reduce the carbon outputs. And they've put numbers to them. So some people want to know what's the biggest bang for the buck and that sort of thing. Or you might just want to get ideas. There's this site called Drawdown. And it's just drawdown.com, I think, maybe org. And you can go there, and if you click on any of these subtopics, you can get all the way down to how many milligrams of carbon or grams of carbon you would save by instituting that practice. Otherwise, it's just a good laundry list for ideas. All right. So another way of going about this, if you want to know what your biggest bang for your buck is, or to get a sense of you personally and the way you live and the way you drive or get around in terms of transportation and the way you shop and all of that, there are many different calculators, carbon calculators out there. They're pretty easy to use. It's a worksheet. It asks you what type of car you have, how many miles you drive, do you take airplanes, all kinds of things, and it'll graph it out similar to this, nice and neat for you. So EPA has a carbon calculator, but there are many that you can find on the web. All right. So we're going to shift into a little bit of a conversation on energy. There are many different ideas you can have for weatherizing your home. So when we talk about energy efficiency, the steps that we're taking actually lead to reduction of carbon emissions because you need less fuel to heat your home or cool your home or that sort of thing. So in addition to the items that I'm sharing, I did put a quick list of the top 20 on the table in back just as you leave the area if you're interested in that. As an example for water heating, you can either have a heavily insulated water heater or in our case, we've been playing this how much can we reduce our carbon footprint game for probably 20 years around our house. And I find it fun. I think my spouse is less enthusiastic about it, but we make the changes anyway. We had changed a number of things, a refrigerator, and as you purchase a new appliance like that, you want to look for Energy Star, lower energy use type appliances, so you're not going to go out probably and redo all your appliances in your home to reduce your carbon footprint, but as you go along, it's a good thing to do. For a water heater, we chose an on-demand water heater, and these are used frequently in Europe, so that while we're working and away from our home 8 hours a day, our water heater isn't heating anything, it's just sitting there. And then when we turn the tap on or run the laundry or whatever, it'll turn our water heater on and use it for that purpose, and it shuts off again. So it doesn't have a tank or anything, which is a little bit of a downside I've thought of if we have a power outage. We live out in the country, and so we're dependent on a well, so we have no 100-gallon supply of water. So there are little subtleties to think about with these things. Okay, moderating temperatures of your home can be pretty easy. And a friend of mine hails from Bangladesh, and he said, we never have air conditioners, and it gets much hotter, much more humid than it does in Wisconsin, so I don't understand why people have all these temperature control things, because normally, if it's really hot, in the middle of the day, the elders will go out and sit under a tree. Anyway, we can think about trees definitely moderate temperature. There are some rules of thumb to plant your trees on the south and the west side of your home. You might want to choose different types of trees. So in the areas where you don't mind your house always being shaded, or the wind being blocked in the winter time, so that your house isn't getting hit by whatever polar vortex winds, you might want to put evergreen trees on that side. But if you choose trees that lose their leaves and place them on the south side, you can get some nice shading in the summertime, and then they drop their leaves and you get some nice heating from the sun coming through, because leaves aren't blocking it in the winter. Transportation, there are numerous options for that. It's not only the vehicle that you choose, it's also how you drive that vehicle. So I'm fortunate enough to have a vehicle that tells me both instantaneously and then in 5-minute averages what my miles per gallon are. So another game for me, this is the driving game. And it did actually give me feedback so that I changed my driving pattern, because you get kind of greedy, and when you stop getting an average of 50 miles per gallon and you're only getting 45 miles per gallon, you get a little bit nervous. So you pay attention to your driving again. And one thing that I did notice is, no matter what vehicle I'm driving, if I'm driving much above 70, it really starts to consume gas. So electric vehicles, as Ben mentioned, they're putting a charging station in at Midstate in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. So that's something. When we're getting to the point where smaller cities, kind of not even in the main downtown, are putting charging stations in, we're getting somewhere. And likely, EVs, electric vehicles, are going to be dominant within the next 5 to 10 years, and we won't be using gasoline vehicles, at least not to the extent that we do. So if you're curious about them and how you would get around, there are sites like the one on the lower right-hand side here that you can go on Google or other apps that have this information, and they'll show you where charging stations are, and then they color code the stations, whether they're free or if you need to pay, and they're rated at different charging capacities, the speed that you can charge up your vehicle. Fortunately, up the road from Ben and I, one of our friends has been installing PV for a number of years, and so we get to see his and his wife's Teslas driving around our neighborhood. Very envious. Okay, energy independence is a big thing that people are getting more and more into. Focus on Energy this year has some really good incentives, and that is, we all pay into Focus on our electric bills, and then if you want to put solar on your rooftop or your barn or whatever, you can get some of that money kicked back. And I noticed recently that rural residents can get twice as much back right now through Focus. So if you were on the edge and not certain about that, now is a good time, I guess. There's also good programming for energy efficiencies for barns that have lost their roof in Wisconsin due to the snow loads that we had earlier. I'm not sure if we're doing a Central Wisconsin group buy, but in previous years, the Mid-State Renewable Energy Association has gone around to a variety of communities in Central Wisconsin And the way it works is you all step up and indicate that you want solar for your home, barn, business, whatever. And you kind of get a group deal that way. So the more people that participate, the more of a discount you get. Last year, central Wisconsin really got whooped by, up in the Chequamegon Bay area by Ashland and Bayfield. They had a fabulous group buy up there. I like to believe it's because we already have more solar than them. So we have a system on our barn at home, and in the wintertime we pay up towards our electricity, but in starting maybe a month ago, we either break even or you can actually see your dial going backwards, and the electric company will be paying us for the energy we produce. So energy independence is pretty cool, and I know there's quite a few people out here that have already gone down that route. And then you can think about adding additional panels for charging your electric vehicle, and then you don't have to pay elsewhere. So recently, the county has been working on a solar-ready designation, and those are for larger scale renewable energy systems, and I have a slide about that coming up. But as part of our solar-ready designation, we needed to provide information to the public, make it easily accessible. So I wanted to point out the lovely webpage that we now have on Wood County's website. If you go to the home page, there's a link right away where you can get to this website, and it has information on both energy efficiency and incentive programs, and as well as renewables, how to get started, and the different policies that are associated, and again, incentive programs. The various, I think there's 6 different electrical utilities in Wood County, and some of them go through Focus and some of them have their own incentive programs. Okay, so utility scale renewables is something new, especially to Wisconsin. We have some funny laws that are making it less easy for the companies that would install these to come into the state. There's a little bit less certainty because of the way our state statutes are written compared to Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan. So they're ahead of us a little bit, but nonetheless, we're going to catch up. And so the map to your right shows the proposed large-scale solar facilities. So to give you an idea what those numbers mean, right now I think our biggest is 5 megawatts, is that right? Not even. And all told, if you tally up all of the wind energy and the solar energy produced in our state, it's under 100 megawatts. So you can see some of these systems being proposed are 100, 200, 300 megawatts. We're talking a game changer here, big time. And part of the reasoning behind this has a lot to do with the fact that everybody, or a lot of people have read the IPCC report, and whether you sell gas and oil or not, you still have children and grandchildren, right? So it's an incentive for everybody, but in addition, the cost of solar panels and systems has gone down just dramatically because of its the production levels of solar panels has increased so much because of worldwide demand. So it's actually nearly cheaper, like within the next few years it'll be cheaper to put in a solar farm than it will to build a coal-fired power plant. And right now Wisconsin has a few coal-fired plants and a nuclear power plant that are being decommissioned, right? So instead of them being replaced with new coal-fired power plants, we're talking renewable energy systems at a large scale. A lot of these are also being considered or installed with storage systems. So storage of power so that it's not all going on the grid when the sun is shining and then we have nothing at night, right? Or when the wind is blowing and then we have nothing when it's still. So there's storage systems that are being not only implemented, but they're making great strides in what that looks like, and the cost for storage is also being reduced. So you'll notice most of the proposed sites are south. It's not because they have more sun in southern Wisconsin. It has more to do with prioritizing where they're initially going to go in areas with greater populations. They're also located where there are existing grid lines that and transmitters and whatever that you need in order to move that energy around. So those will be the highest priorities, and then they'll spread out, and there'll be more of them as time goes on. The first two were approved in the state last week. So one is a 300 megawatt and the other is 150 megawatt, I believe. One in the southwest and one in the eastern part of the state. More to come. So as part of the county's Solar Ready initiative, what we're trying to do is just go through ordinances, like zoning ordinances and permitting processes and that sort of thing, to make sure that we don't have unforeseen impediments to solar and renewables being put in place, whether it's for individuals to use on their home or barn or whatever, or the larger scale systems. It's supposed that the large scale systems will be quite competitive at first, so the counties that make it easier for companies will be likely chosen first. And there are some pretty good benefits to the property owners. The towns that these are located in will get annual payments for 25 years. The contract period on those larger systems is about 25 years. And then the county will also get an annual payment for 25 years. So that's in lieu of property taxes that would otherwise be charged on the property, but it becomes a utility. Those systems are designed to go in on pedestals. A lot of them are being placed in part on agricultural properties where farmers that are uncertain about their future can put some of their land into this large-scale solar and continue to farm the rest. The large-scale solar area functions similar to some of the federal programs that pay farmers to rest their soil for 10 and 20 years. Only they're getting money back when they have the solar pedestals in, because the company pays them money. And then when the system, if it isn't extended beyond the 25-year contract period, then those pedestals will be pulled out, and it can go right back into agriculture, whatever land use the property owner deems that they want it to get into. So a lot of times native plants are planted below these systems so that they have benefits for pollinator insects, which also benefits adjacent agriculture. And water quality, of course. Uh-oh, I'm getting the 5-minute, guys. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening in Wood County, what some of your communities have done that you may or may not be aware of. So Marshfield, Pittsville, and Wisconsin Rapids a while ago passed 25% renewables by 2025. I'm not sure where they're at with that, I'm not sure if they know they did that, but they're, but they're on the books, so. There's a state website that I pulled that off, by the way, so you can go check that out. Some of the community energy projects that are being done in Wisconsin, these are just kind of different examples of what you could think about doing. So Gunderson Lutheran is a medical facility, and they have probably the most aggressive energy and sustainability initiatives in the state in terms of medical facilities. So they've done 53% reduction in their energy consumption since 2008. So they're saving a lot of money there. They have a number of facilities. So the cumulative savings is about $11 million over that time period. So Portage County decided to put a plan together for energy efficiencies to see if they could save money that way, and they, after 3 years of implementing their plan, depending on the weather, they save between $80,000 and $100,000 every year. So this isn't just carbon reduction, it's also a big cost savings. Okay, Marshfield recently built a fire station that was LEED Gold certified, so that means that it was built in a very sustainable manner, meeting certain criteria and expectations. They have PV panels, they have ways to kind of close off their area that might have a vehicle that needs heating versus vehicles that don't need heating before they had to heat the whole thing, right? If they have water in a vehicle, you can't just park it in there on our polar vortex days and think you're going to have liquid water if a fire crops up. So they have all kinds of efficiencies that were put into that. And then in Rapids, of course, we're in a building that's got solar panels on it. They are working with their wastewater treatment plant to reuse some of the methane that's produced from the solid portion of our waste products. And they have already become a solar-ready community at the gold level. So it's called Soul Smart, and it's gold. And I see there's Portage County people out here too, and your county is also going for this solar ready designation, as is Stevens Point. Marshfield, I believe, is planning on getting their own designation too. So this is just a bunch of different incentive programs. It's kind of a complicated table, but I put it in there to remind us that it's not just focus on energy that has incentive programs. There's programs for businesses to put energy efficiencies in place called PACE. Solar for Good is for not-for-profit organizations. There are foundations that provide funding and incentives for almost every one of these categories: home, business, farm, and government, and then U.S. Department of Energy. And right now, U.S. Department of Energy is rolling out grants like I've never seen them before for moving technologies forward related to renewables. All kinds of challenge programs by the millions of dollars. Almost every week something new comes out. So if you're an innovator, there's money out there for you. All right, this is just a focus on energy. Got the 1 minute now, guys. It's serious stuff. Okay, I wanted to touch on workforce development. Right now, there's about 76,000 jobs in Wisconsin related to energy, either efficiencies or renewables. There were about 1,800 new jobs created in the state last year, and they're estimating over 6,000 new jobs in 2019. So this isn't dragging our economy down, it's actually adding to it. And slowly we eke our way to the new Green Deal. I have quite a bit of information and ideas about flood. I talked about that early on, and I'm happy to stay for our community conversation and talk more about different ways that you can do adaptation strategies in the area. So, I want to talk really briefly about framing your conversations, and with keeping in mind that addressing climate change is really hard for us because it's not our nature. People are really good at very localized scale things, so that's what you want to think about, is things you can do locally. We have short time frames that we like to work with. And we like to address immediate problems. So now it's an immediate problem. We waited long enough, and at least we can check that one off. Climate change is the opposite of all of it, right? It's a global scale, so it's really big. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around. It's, investing over a long period of time. And our payback is not necessarily immediate, and the climate change that we've been talking about is not necessarily immediate either. So there are many ways you can think about telling stories about climate change. This is a fabulous website that has little video vignettes. Each one of those topics is a 3-minute video that was made. People talking about maple syruping or the Burka binder or whatever. So when you're talking with people about climate change, you want to think about what's meaningful to you as well as what's meaningful to the person that you're talking to. So if they're into fishing, you're going to talk about, hey, did you realize that there's impacts to fishing and that sort of thing. There are 6 Americas that we're dealing with. So Yale has been doing surveys and survey estimates about public opinion associated with climate change for many, many years. And right now, this is about where we land. So you have roughly 60% of America is either alarmed or concerned. 17% are cautious, and then smaller numbers are disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive. But for whatever reason, we seem to hyper-focus on that smaller portion of the dismissive. So I wanted to add this, this graphic because I think it's really important for you to think about when you're thinking about how you might want to expend energy, your personal energy and efforts related to communicating about climate change. So this graphic is not climate change specific. It's an adaptation graphic, and it falls out the same whether we're adapting to whatever, a new type of vehicle or whatever it is. You have people on the left end that are the innovators. So they're going to jump on it. They think it's cool, let's try it out, let's make it happen, right? Behind them are people that are going to wait a little bit and they're like, that's pretty cool, I could jump on that. And then you get progressively slower adaptation as you move to the right. And on the far right, you have what they term laggards. And those folks, they're not coming to your party. Or if they are, they're not coming anytime soon. So there isn't a reason to focus your energy, unless you really like expending your energy that way, on getting everybody on board before you move forward, okay? So if that, I mean, it's totally up to you, but I personally let them do their thing. Okay, Yale's Climate Opinion Survey is out with the 2018 results. And I used to not talk about this at all because I'm like, I don't care about opinion, it's fact and data. But when I'm thinking about communicating, I want to know kind of where people are at. So you can actually select your county, and it'll give you a whole series of graphs. These are not people that were surveyed directly necessarily. So they send surveys across the country, and then they model based on different demographics what it is the likely response for your county, or you can do it by congressional district if that's your thing. So I'm just putting these up. I have them printed out if you want them to think about more, but there are a lot of different questions in here that can help you kind of think about how to communicate if you're trying to relate to someone. And as an example, this bottom one where there's an arrow says, climate change affects me personally. And in Wood County, only 34% were estimated to have that opinion, that they are personally affected by climate change. That's because we haven't had our big flood event yet. But anyway, so if you're talking with someone, you have to know, it's good to know that they aren't feeling personally tied to this at this time, right? But some of the questions that came out with high percentages, up here, the second one, 68% feel global warming will harm plants and animals, right? So if the majority of people think that way, if you're going to have a conversation, that would be a better conversation to frame around. So there's a whole bunch of questions that are asked, in case you're into the communication thing. The other thing that I would suggest related to communication is, your job is not to go out and convince people that climate change is happening and real, right? The idea is to get people to kind of move forward with things that would either mitigate or adapt. We need to communicate with one another regardless of what we're thinking about climate change. And so, lost my train of thought here. So you don't need to necessarily cause a family argument at Thanksgiving or something trying to convince someone. But if you put efficiencies on your home or solar panels on your home or whatever, you can talk about how much money you saved and what was the incentive program, or what's it like to have solar on your home, and that sort of thing. And you never really have to mention climate change. So I'm not suggesting go out there and argue with your neighbors or family or anything, because that's not very productive. And we need to get going on improvements, mitigation and adaptation to make our communities safer and to slow the rate of climate change. So I was at a climate adaptation forum last week, and we ended our forum with this bit.ly site placed up on the screen, and it's a place where you can go and you can make commitments for what you commit to do over the next year in terms of climate change.